Imagine waking up on a quiet Sunday morning in America. Newspapers are filled with headlines about a war raging thousands of miles away. Europe is burning. Cities are collapsing. Entire nations have fallen under Nazi occupation. Yet for millions of Americans in late 1941, it still wasn't their war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had spent years preparing the United States for the possibility that one day it might have no choice but to fight. But much of the American public remained deeply skeptical. The scars of World War I were still fresh. Families remembered sons who never came home. Veterans remembered muddy trenches and meaningless slaughter. Across the country, people asked the same question. Why should America fight another European war? Then, on December 7, 1941, everything changed. The attack on Pearl Harbor shocked the nation. Within hours, the United States was no longer watching history from a distance. It had become part of it. The next day, Congress declared war on Japan with overwhelming support. But something even more astonishing happened just a few days later. On December 11th, Adolf Hitler voluntarily declared war on the United States. He didn't have to. There was no legal obligation forcing Germany into conflict with America. Japan had not asked for Germany's help. The Tripartite Pact, the alliance between Germany, Italy, and Japan, only required military assistance if one of the members was attacked first. Japan had launched the attack at Pearl Harbor. It was the aggressor, not the victim. So why would Hitler make one of the most consequential decisions of World War II? Why would he willingly bring the world's greatest industrial power into a war he was already struggling to win? It is a decision that historians have debated for decades. Some call it arrogance. Others believe it was desperation. Many argue it was simply one of the greatest strategic mistakes in modern history. To understand why Hitler declared war on America, we have to travel back years before Pearl Harbor. Long before American soldiers landed in Europe, long before D-Day, long before the Battle of the Bulge, the United States and Nazi Germany were already moving toward an unavoidable collision. When Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, the United States officially remained neutral. America had no desire for another European conflict. President Roosevelt was cautious. Congress passed neutrality acts designed to prevent the nation from being dragged into another overseas war. But neutrality did not mean indifference. As Hitler rebuilt Germany's military in violation of the Treaty of Versailles, American intelligence watched carefully. When Germany remilitarized the Rhineland, annexed Austria, and dismantled Czechoslovakia, concern inside Washington steadily grew. Still, most Americans believed Europe should solve Europe's problems. Everything changed in September 1939. Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war. World War II had officially begun. Although America stayed officially neutral, Roosevelt understood something many others did not. If Britain fell, Nazi Germany would dominate Europe. If Europe fell under Hitler's control, the balance of global power would shift dramatically. Eventually, the United States itself could face a world where hostile dictatorships controlled both Europe and Asia. Roosevelt couldn't openly enter the war. Public opinion simply wasn't there. Instead, he searched for another solution. Help Britain survive. American factories became the arsenal of democracy. Weapons, aircraft, food, fuel, medical supplies. Every month, more ships crossed the Atlantic carrying desperately needed supplies to Britain. For Hitler, this looked less like neutrality and more like undeclared war. German leaders watched American industry with growing concern. Unlike Germany, whose economy struggled under years of military expansion, the United States possessed enormous industrial capacity. Detroit alone could produce staggering numbers of vehicles. Steel mills ran day and night. Shipyards expanded at incredible speed. Aircraft factories multiplied across the country. Even before officially entering the war, American production was beginning to overwhelm the Axis powers. Hitler understood numbers. He knew industrial power often decided modern wars. Yet he believed Germany could win before American production truly mattered. That belief would shape every decision he made. Throughout 1940, Germany seemed unstoppable. Denmark fell. Norway collapsed. The Netherlands surrendered. Belgium surrendered. Luxembourg disappeared almost overnight. Then came France. Many military experts expected another long trench war like World War I. Instead, German armored divisions smashed through the Ardennes forest. French defenses collapsed with shocking speed. Paris fell. Within weeks, one of Europe's strongest armies had surrendered. Across the world, observers were stunned. Germany appeared invincible. For Hitler, victory reinforced dangerous confidence. Every gamble seemed to work. Every risk brought greater rewards. The rapid victories convinced him that bold decisions, not cautious planning, won wars. This confidence would later influence his decision regarding America. But Britain refused to surrender. Despite standing alone, Winston Churchill vowed to continue fighting. The Battle of Britain became Germany's first major setback. The Luftwaffe failed to destroy the Royal Air Force. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, was postponed indefinitely. Unable to invade Britain directly, Germany launched devastating bombing campaigns against British cities. Night after night, bombs fell across London. Entire neighborhoods vanished beneath explosions. Civilians crowded underground subway stations seeking shelter. Yet Britain survived. And every week, American supplies continued arriving. Roosevelt pushed Congress toward greater involvement without officially declaring war. In March 1941, Congress approved the Lend-Lease Act. This legislation transformed America's role. Instead of simply selling weapons, the United States would lend or lease military equipment to countries fighting the Axis. Britain received tanks, aircraft, destroyers, trucks, food, millions upon millions of dollars worth of supplies. Later, the Soviet Union would receive enormous amounts as well. Hitler was furious. From Berlin's perspective, America had abandoned neutrality. Although American soldiers were not yet fighting German troops, American factories were strengthening Germany's enemies every single day. Several incidents nearly triggered war. In September 1941, the USS Greer encountered a German U-boat. Shots were exchanged. Both sides accused the other of firing first. Roosevelt responded with what became known as the shoot-on-sight order. American naval vessels were instructed to attack German submarines threatening shipping. Months before Pearl Harbor, American and German forces were already exchanging fire in the Atlantic Ocean. Although Congress had not declared war, an undeclared naval conflict had effectively begun. Hitler noticed, but he remained strangely cautious. Despite growing tensions, he repeatedly instructed submarine commanders to avoid provoking the United States whenever possible. Why? Because his attention was focused elsewhere. In June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. More than 3 million German soldiers invaded the Soviet Union in the largest military invasion in human history. Hitler believed the campaign would end within months. He considered the Soviet Union weak, corrupt, and incapable of prolonged resistance. German armies advanced hundreds of miles. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded. Millions of prisoners were captured. Cities fell one after another. Once again, Hitler believed victory was inevitable. If the Soviet Union collapsed before winter, Germany could then concentrate all its resources against Britain. And perhaps America would never enter the war at all. But history had other plans. The distances across Russia were enormous. Roads turned into mud after autumn rains. Supply lines stretched to their breaking point. Fuel became scarce. Vehicles broke down. Then winter arrived. Temperatures plunged far below zero. German soldiers lacked proper winter clothing. Weapons froze. Engines refused to start. The Soviet army, battered but not defeated, launched massive counterattacks outside Moscow. For the first time in the war, Hitler's army suffered a major strategic failure. Instead of winning a quick victory, Germany found itself trapped in a brutal two-front struggle against an enemy that refused to surrender. At exactly the same time, events were unfolding thousands of miles away in the Pacific. Japan had been expanding across Asia for years. Its invasion of China had already caused unimaginable destruction. Economic sanctions imposed by the United States threatened Japan's access to vital oil supplies. Japanese leaders faced a difficult choice: withdraw from occupied territories, or seize the resources they needed by force. They chose war. The attack on Pearl Harbor was designed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and buy Japan time to conquer Southeast Asia before America could recover. The attack succeeded tactically. Battleships burned. Aircraft were destroyed. More than 2,400 Americans were killed. But Japan failed to destroy America's aircraft carriers, fuel reserves, and repair facilities, the assets that would soon prove decisive. The following day, President Roosevelt stood before Congress and delivered one of the most famous speeches in American history. He called December 7th, a date which will live in infamy. Within hours, the United States declared war on Japan. At that moment, Adolf Hitler still had a choice. He could remain focused on defeating Britain and the Soviet Union. He could avoid adding America's enormous military and industrial power to Germany's growing list of enemies. Legally, he had no obligation to intervene. Strategically, many of his own advisors believed avoiding war with the United States would be the wiser course. Yet just 3 days later, Hitler stepped before the Reichstag in Berlin and made a decision that would alter the course of the 20th century forever. He declared war on the United States of America. And in doing so, he transformed what had been two separate global conflicts into one truly worldwide war. Across the Atlantic, Americans woke to stunning headlines. Germany had declared war on the United States. There had been no American invasion of Europe. No American bombing campaign against Berlin. No declaration of war from Congress against Germany. Instead, Adolf Hitler had made the first move. On December 11, 1941, speaking before the Reichstag in Berlin, Hitler accused the United States of secretly waging war against Germany for years. He claimed President Franklin Roosevelt had manipulated America into supporting Britain's fight against the Third Reich. To Hitler, the declaration was not the beginning of a new conflict. It was simply the formal recognition of one that already existed. But behind the confident speech was a decision shaped by ideology, miscalculation, and wishful thinking. Hitler genuinely believed America was already Germany's enemy. 4 months, American destroyers had escorted Allied convoys across the Atlantic. German U-boats had repeatedly encountered U.S. naval vessels. Roosevelt's shoot-on-sight policy meant American ships could attack German submarines whenever they believed a threat existed. From Hitler's perspective, neutrality had become a fiction. He saw American factories producing tanks that rolled across North Africa. Aircraft built in American factories defended British skies. American food kept Britain alive under blockade. American trucks carried Soviet soldiers across frozen battlefields. Although American soldiers were not yet fighting on European soil, American industry was already strengthening every major enemy Germany faced. In Hitler's mind, the United States had already entered the war economically and militarily. He believed declaring war merely acknowledged reality. But ideology also clouded his judgment. Throughout his political career, Hitler consistently underestimated the United States. He viewed America as a nation weakened by racial diversity, political disagreement, and what he considered excessive capitalism. Nazi racial ideology convinced Hitler that countries built from immigrants could never equal what he imagined to be the unity and strength of Germany, that he dismissed American democracy as slow and indecisive. He believed political arguments would prevent rapid military mobilization. Most importantly, he believed Americans lacked the willingness to endure a long and costly war. It was an extraordinary misreading of the country. The United States had one of the world's largest economies. Its population exceeded 130 million people. Its factories possessed enormous unused capacity. Its natural resources seemed almost limitless. And unlike much of Europe, American industry had never been bombed. Hitler focused on what America lacked in experience rather than what it possessed in potential. He saw an army that ranked far below Europe's great powers. He saw a navy divided between two oceans. He saw a country still recovering from the Great Depression. He failed to see what American industry could become once fully mobilized. This wasn't the first time Hitler had underestimated an opponent. He underestimated Britain. He underestimated the Soviet Union. Now he underestimated the United States. Another factor influenced his decision. Operation Barbarossa. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Hitler expected complete victory before winter. Even after the campaign slowed, he convinced himself success remained inevitable. He believed Moscow would eventually fall. He believed the Red Army was on the verge of collapse. If the Soviet Union were defeated in 1942, Germany could redirect millions of soldiers westward. In Hitler's calculations, America simply wouldn't have enough time to build an army capable of challenging Germany before Europe was securely under Nazi control. He believed he was racing against the clock, and that Germany would reach the finish line first. There was also another reason many historians point to. Hitler admired Japan. Although separated by thousands of miles and vastly different cultures, Germany and Japan shared common enemies: Britain, the Soviet Union, and increasingly the United States. By declaring war on America immediately after Pearl Harbor, Hitler hoped Japan would return the favor. His dream was simple. If Germany supported Japan against America, perhaps Japan would attack the Soviet Union from the east. Such an attack would force Stalin to fight on two fronts. It could divide Soviet resources and finally destroy Soviet resistance. For Hitler, this seemed logical. But Tokyo had completely different priorities. Japanese leaders had already fought the Soviet Union in border conflicts during the late 1930s. Those battles had ended badly for Japan. Instead of attacking Siberia, Japan chose to expand south toward Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Its objectives included the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and countless Pacific islands. Japan had no interest in opening another massive land war against the Soviet Union. Hitler expected strategic cooperation. Instead, each Axis power largely fought its own separate war. There was no unified grand strategy. Germany concentrated on Europe. Italy struggled in the Mediterranean. Japan focused on the Pacific. Although called allies, coordination between them remained surprisingly limited. Hitler's declaration therefore gained Germany almost nothing. But it handed Roosevelt exactly what he needed. Until December 11th, Roosevelt still faced political challenges if he wanted Congress to declare war on Germany. The American public was furious with Japan after Pearl Harbor. Support for war against Germany was increasing, but legal and political questions remained. Hitler eliminated those questions overnight. Congress responded almost immediately. The United States declared war on Germany with overwhelming support. Now America could fight both major Axis powers without controversy. Ironically, Hitler solved Roosevelt's biggest political problem himself. The consequences reached far beyond diplomacy. American factories accelerated to levels the world had never witnessed. The United States didn't simply increase production. It transformed production itself. Automobile factories that once built family cars began producing tanks. Typewriter manufacturers built machine guns. Refrigerator companies manufactured aircraft components. Civilian industries shifted toward military production with astonishing speed. Entire shipyards appeared almost overnight. Workers labored around the clock. Women entered factories in unprecedented numbers, symbolized by the now famous image of Rosie the Riveter. The scale was almost impossible to comprehend. By the end of the war, the United States had produced roughly 300,000 military aircraft, nearly 90,000 tanks, hundreds of thousands of trucks, thousands of naval vessels, millions of rifles, billions of rounds of ammunition. The numbers dwarfed Germany's industrial output. American shipyards became legendary. One Liberty ship could eventually be assembled in only weeks. Some emergency demonstrations completed ships in just a few days. German submarine commanders suddenly faced an impossible reality. They could sink merchant ships faster than before. Yet American shipbuilders replaced them even faster. The Battle of the Atlantic slowly shifted. Every ship sunk seemed to be replaced by two more. Germany simply could not compete with America's industrial capacity. Meanwhile, American scientists, engineers, and military planners expanded production with relentless efficiency. Standardized designs, assembly line techniques, mass logistics, railroads, pipelines, convoys, factories. Everything became interconnected. America transformed into what Roosevelt proudly called the arsenal of democracy. The impact stretched beyond American forces. Through Lend-Lease, the United States continued supplying Britain and the Soviet Union. Thousands of trucks carried Soviet troops across the Eastern Front. Locomotives kept Soviet railways moving. Food shipments fed soldiers and civilians alike. Aviation fuel powered Allied aircraft. Communication equipment improved battlefield coordination. Even boots, uniforms, and canned food crossed oceans in staggering quantities. Some historians argue these supplies did not win the war alone. But few deny they dramatically strengthened the Allies' ability to keep fighting. Every month Germany now faced stronger enemies, not weaker ones. Hitler had hoped America would remain distracted by Japan. Instead, Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill adopted a Germany-first strategy. Although Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor, Allied leaders concluded Nazi Germany represented the greater long-term threat. This decision surprised many Americans. Families demanded revenge against Japan. But military planners believed Germany possessed the stronger economy, the larger scientific base, and the greater ability to dominate Europe permanently. So even while brutal fighting continued across the Pacific, enormous American resources flowed toward Europe. Convoys crossed the Atlantic. Bombers arrived in Britain. Soldiers trained for campaigns in North Africa, Italy, and eventually France. Hitler had unintentionally invited America's full military strength into the European theater. The German dictator remained publicly confident. He assured his generals victory was still certain. He insisted America's army was inexperienced. He predicted political disagreements would eventually divide the Allies. He believed Britain would collapse under bombing. He believed the Soviet Union was nearing defeat. He believed German technology would overcome Allied numbers. Each prediction proved increasingly detached from reality. By 1942, Germany faced enemies whose combined economic power vastly exceeded its own. The United States, the British Empire, the Soviet Union. Together, they represented overwhelming manpower, industrial production, financial resources, and scientific innovation. German victories became harder to replace. Every experienced pilot lost in combat represented years of training. Every destroyed tank required scarce materials. Every submarine sunk meant another skilled crew gone forever. America, by contrast, replaced losses with astonishing speed. A damaged bomber was replaced. A sunk cargo ship was replaced. A destroyed tank was replaced. Factories never stopped. Hitler had believed war against America would change very little. Instead, it changed everything. The balance of the war had begun shifting, not because of one battle but because of economics, logistics, and production. Wars are often remembered for dramatic moments. Pearl Harbor, Stalingrad, D-Day, the Battle of the Bulge. But beneath every famous battle lies an invisible contest. Who can build more? Who can transport more? Who can replace losses faster? By declaring war on the United States, Hitler unknowingly entered a competition Germany was almost certain to lose. And the full consequences of that decision would become painfully clear over the next 3 years, as American soldiers crossed oceans, American bombers filled European skies, and the Third Reich found itself fighting an enemy whose true strength Hitler had never fully understood. On December 11, 1941, Adolf Hitler stood before the Reichstag and declared war on the United States. There was no treaty forcing him to do it. No German city had been bombed by American aircraft. No American army had landed in Europe. It was a choice, one that shocked the world. Some believed it was an act of loyalty to Japan. Others called it arrogance. Many historians now consider it one of the greatest strategic blunders in military history. But was Hitler's decision really irrational? Or did he believe he had a plan that would secure Germany's victory before America's industrial giant could fully awaken? In today's documentary, we're uncovering the real reasons why Nazi Germany declared war on the United States, what Hitler expected to happen, why his generals were divided over the decision, and how just a few words spoken in Berlin helped reshape the course of World War II forever. This is the story of the declaration of war that changed the fate of nations, and perhaps sealed the fate of the Third Reich itself.